make sure we do that. And welcome everybody to today's webinar. We are so excited to be with you. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Maddie Gullickson. I'm a program director at the National Cybersecurity Center. We're a nonprofit based in Colorado Springs. We've been around for about 4 or 5 years at this point, and we were started by Governor Hickenlooper, really trying to be dedicated to cyber education and awareness in the state and throughout the country, hence our name. And one of the things that got us really excited to connect on this is we've recently been working with the Colorado Whole of State Working Group, which is a group of stellar individuals like Amber all throughout the state who are just really passionate about cybersecurity resources for local government. And as part of that, we set up the Colorado Cyber Resource Center, and we're starting these various webinar series on topics that matter to local government with regards to cybersecurity. And so in partnership with us today is Eugene Wade from the Colorado Emergency Preparedness Partnership. And I'm gonna let him say a few words about his organization as well. And then we'll jump into our two fabulous speakers today to talk more about how we create this bridge between cybersecurity and emergency management groups. So Eugene, do you want to jump in real quick?
Sure, thanks, Maddie. So yes, I'm Eugene Wade, the Executive Director of the Colorado Emergency Preparedness Partnership. I was made a connection with Maddie a few months ago and very excited about the work that they're doing on the whole estate plan and working with local governments. And we talked about this idea of getting IT and emergency managers working together. And she just happened to know Amber, doing great work over there in Arapahoe County with Nathan Fogg and his team. So we're very excited to bring this webinar to you guys today. And I'm excited that SEP could help be a part of it. Back to you, Maddie.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your partnership. And yeah, so a couple of quick housekeeping items, and then we'll talk a little bit about everybody's background and jump into it. So we do have it set up that as an attendee, you are muted and we won't be able to see you, but you can ask questions through the chat. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please enter it into the chat. Our plan is that we'll address those towards the end of the webinar so we can make sure to get through all the points that our speakers have prepared, but we definitely look forward to questions and dialogue. And as just one last point too, we are recording this, so we'll send it back out to you if you have to leave early. Don't worry about it. We'll make sure you get a recording of it. Please feel free to share that with friends and colleagues that you think would be interested in it as well. And as the absolute final note, why we're all here, the big reason is because we know these are two super critical aspects of local government in particular, yet oftentimes they find it hard to communicate between each other. And we don't want, in Colorado specifically, we don't want it to be when there's an actual emergency that's the first time that you're actually talking to either your cybersecurity team or your emergency management team, whichever way it happens to go. And so we're so grateful to have Nathan Fogg here, who is the director of the Office of Emergency Management for Arapahoe County, and Amber Winters, who's the cybersecurity program director. They are here to talk about some of the work that they have done to really try to break down some of those silos and really offer just some practical tips on how to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to Nathan. And again, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, so like she said, I'm Nate Fogg, the Director of Emergency Management for Arapahoe County. I'll have a few slides here in a second. But in addition to the county, we're kind of unique in that we also have contracts for services that we provide to municipalities. So that includes City of Centennial and City of Inglewood. So we have a kind of a unique customer base and a unique series of interactions where we're not only dealing with just the county cyber and IT folks, but also municipalities that are maybe not as well resourced. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that stuff as we jump into the slides here. Hopefully everyone can see that. All right. So as I said, Nate Fogg, the director for the County Office of Emergency Management. And kind of a little breakdown about the county, who we are for maybe folks who don't know, we're 10 miles wide, 90 miles long, so almost 900 square miles. And on our western edge, we have very dense kind of urban and suburban in the center, out to the really the eastern edges of the county, which feels like it's Kansas, but just short of it. Very rural and frontier, where there's you know, fiber and a lot of places high-speed broadband hadn't even made it out there. So we have really this this huge swath of what our county looks like. That number 660,000 is variable depending. We haven't seen the latest census data, but it's somewhere in that ballpark of number of residents in the county. There are, I think, 13 municipalities in the county as a whole. The county employs 2,000 people that work directly for the county government. And in our OEM, the Office of Emergency Management, there are 7 of us. So OEM, the Office of Emergency Management. I'm going to try to avoid acronyms. If I miss some, please call me out in the chat. OEM and IT cyber are, I think, some of the worst groups ever for acronyms. And a lot of them, we have the same ones, but mean different things. So we try to avoid that. Historically, though, the Offices of Emergency Management are really focused on natural, man-made, and human-caused and pandemic-type disasters, right? Things that are exceedingly complex: tornadoes, floods, wildfires, terror attacks, those sorts of things that really have significant amounts of complexity, but occur in the physical environment. And that's been our focus since really it started with civil defense and almost in the 1950s. And cyber has never been really a part of that until really recently. Something that's critical, I think, in all OEMs is that we have a process. And everything is driven by this acronym, which I spelled out. It's called POETI, but it means it's planning, organizing, equipping, training, exercising, and then I added an E. The POETI is kind of like a industry standard for us, right? But all of those things, the planning, organizing, equipping, training, exercising, are critical. But if you don't ever execute them, you're missing a step. So I added the E there in our organization to really drive what we're trying to accomplish. So if you look at those types of disasters that I've listed there, we want to be able to plan for them. We know that a tornado or a flood is going to happen, so we can plan for that. Organizing, we know who's going to need to be involved in responding to and recovering from those events. We know that we're going to need specific types of equipment, not only from our own experience, but from partners and neighbors and the industry as a whole. So we try to dial in and get the right types of equipment, and then of course the training on how to use those equipment and implement our plan. Once all of that stuff is kind of wrapped together, we look at exercising. So the exercise is just like my wife says, I just go to work and I make believe. So we create a story and then put all of the players and the plans and the pieces and the things into motion. And the whole point of that exercise is to practice and find the weak spots, right? You want to red team your plan and your staffing and all of those things. And at the end of that exercise, you evaluate it honestly. That's the key point of this, is the honest evaluation. And then analyze that evaluation, figure out where you need to improve, and start that process over again, that improvement plan. Then you go through that same series of steps, the organizing, equipment, training, and you re-exercise and make sure that you've made those improvements. If you haven't, then you need to start a process to figure out where maybe that's breaking down. What's the roadblock, the barrier to those improvements? And you'll find, and I think in my experience, we've run into it a number of places in Arapahoe County where sometimes it's the ground level folks that don't want to share, break down their silos. Sometimes it's the executive level and elected leadership that really maybe don't understand what you're trying to accomplish and why those entities need to be connected. So lastly, then you're going to get a chance in the cyber world, especially, you're going to get a chance to execute this. It is If it hasn't happened to you yet, you will become involved in some sort of cyber incident, whether it's malicious or not, it will happen. So those steps will be critical in how well you respond. So that's really OEM in a nutshell. Our cyber nexus is really, we started to accomplish these things like in the intro, we talked about not meeting each other on your bad day. You know, you don't ever want to exchange business cards in the middle of an event. So as much as everyone hates it, meetings and coming together are key, right? So you have to have those meetings, get to know each other, lay the groundwork, share your plans. Chances are most of the IT folks and cybersecurity folks have some kind of playbook or an incident response guide or something like that. And your OEMs are required by law to have an emergency operations plan. So find those plans and bring them together and review them. Find where the similarities are. Find if there's a place where one conflicts with the other in those meeting cycles, right? Once that's done, then we go into that exercise you want to talk about. And you don't want to do this massive, everyone attends type of exercise. It's a very informal discussion, tabletop type event where there's a simple scenario and you're testing a few key components of those plans. And right back into that last slide, now you're looking at your outcomes. What happened? Did the plans mesh up? Did the conflicts that maybe you found, were they resolved, or did more come to light? And then again, cycle into that improvement plan. The process, I don't think, is unique to OEM, and it's an improvement process, really, right? So everyone's going to use that. We just have silly acronyms for it. So really, this is the steps that we took in Arapahoe County to kind of start this off. Now, this is where it does get a little bit unique to the emergency management world. And for the EM folks, you're going to get this. For the cyber folks, hopefully you get it, but maybe not. So ESFs, and I spell it out on the left, so I'm still looking on my acronym roll. Emergency support function. And so what is that? An emergency support function. In kind of the standard model, there's 15, maybe 16 support functions. And what those functions do is they come together in an operations center, either in person or virtual, and they represent their core business unit. So for instance, you have communications, you can have, your road and bridge folks, you can have law enforcement and fire and health and human services, all sorts of folks who represent a specific function. They come together and they bring their knowledge and resources to bear to mitigate an ongoing event. The whole idea really is to ease human suffering, right? So we bring all of these folks, 16 different groups, and their expertise together into one place and use a unified model to orient them, define our goals and objectives, and then check in with them as they're performing those tasks to get those goals and objectives achieved. There's federal models, state models, and local models. There's never a one-size-fits-all way to do this because the emergency support function and the OEM as a whole should be a reflection of its community. So you want to model the way you're doing business with the way your community expects you to do business, and it's not the same everywhere. So they should be a little unique. To that end, cyber doesn't fit in any one place in any model. There's still not yet a national model. There's one under development, but there's not a national model on how to do this. So develop the one that works for your community. It came to my attention in the OEM world through CJIS, which is the Criminal Justice Information System in Colorado. And they were some of our early exposure came to them because we deal with law enforcement sensitive information. So because of that, we had to go through some network hardening things. Many years ago, we had to have some audits. All of the employees had to go through annual training and refresher training, those sorts of things. And it really brought to the forefront, because in the OEM world, that, hey, this is really a serious matter. The amount of information that we have and is critical. So we need to be able to protect that. And if we are attacked, what are the consequences? So really, that in the OEM world started our interest in cyber. And then we got to start working with Amber, and we found out that we have a lot of overlap. I've kind of hinted on those things already and reiterate them because they're important. Acronyms are key. When you meet with each other, avoid the lingo or explain it. Use them sparingly. We both develop, like I said, plans and playbooks, bring them together. That's key. The things that you're already doing, just leverage those to make each unit a little better. Something that is really maybe specific to the OEM world is that we have a lot of stuff and a lot of access to stuff. And all of that stuff, whether they're people or equipment or phone numbers, it doesn't really, any of those things, everything is typed. We call them type and kind, right? So that what is this? And then what capability does it have? Is it a network engineer? Is this network engineer a type 5 engineer who's brand new and has no experience, or is it a type 1 who manages massive networks across a global scale? And so we do that typing from 5 being the kind of the simplest, and I don't mean that in a bad way, right? Your simplest resource, all the way up to a type 1, which is massively skilled and experienced. So we do that across the board for everything from fire trucks to people to computers. And we maintain those lists. That's key. And I'll explain why it's key here in a second. The next part of that is organizing complex resource response and support systems. As an event scales, and most will, most events will scale up at some point and it becomes more complex. The structure of the organization that's managing that complexity also needs to increase. And if you can't draw on that list of skilled, experienced resources and equipment, you may start floundering and you may start struggling a little bit more than is necessary. And then lastly, the incident command system, right? Maybe everyone's heard of this, but it was born in wildland firefighting in the 70s. And after 9/11 was kind of adopted nationally. The county adopted it as a standard where every employee has to go through basic incident command system training. So that put us on the same front right away in IT and OEM, that we understood this common methodology that we would use to manage these events as they became more complex. So using that system, we recognize when complexity is increasing, we work backwards and we can identify the resources that we need using our plans and go then to execute things that Amber and her team are going to say, hey, here's our goals, here's what we need to do, and then we'll support them in that effort. And most importantly, out of all of these things, those three, I think, are the key right there. You need to develop those relationships with each other and across your teams. You need to be able to use those relationships to explain where your improvements maybe are getting stalled, whether it's at that low level or if it's at an executive level. That relationship building develops trust. If there's not that trust, you're likely to not be as effective. And I think the biggest component out of all of this is that we've been able to learn from each other. I've taken so much from what Amber's put together with this crew and understand more about the way they're going to handle this problem when it happens, and it has happened here. And from that, we're able to modify our system to meet their needs and support each other. Keep the response minimized and the damage minimized as much as possible. And by the way, the front end mitigation always way cheaper than the back end. So using that all together, we've been able to do a ton of mitigation on our side as the county to help limit damages there. So No, it probably went a little fast. Hopefully everything's clear. If there's not, please throw it in the chat. And I'm gonna wrap up there. Turn it over to Amber. She has a lot more interesting things to say.
Well, thank you, Nate. I want to give a huge shout out to Nate's team. He didn't give himself or his team near enough credit. What started this conversation between Nate and I was when I came to the county a couple of years ago. I was developing out our incident response plan and making sure that we had playbooks to fit everything, which, as many of you know, is impossible. But we were working through this, and everywhere we go, incident response is handled differently. And with OEM, I thought to myself, okay, the Office of Emergency Management handles emergencies, and cyber stuff should not be a cyber thing. It should be handled like any other emergency. So I emailed Nathan and his team, and I asked them to sit down and explain to me. And so I'm going to bring up my slides here, but if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat and we can discuss afterwards. But I'm kind of going to expand a little bit more on what Nate talked about. So let me share my screen quick. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Yes, okay. So let's talk about bridging the gap. All right, so this is just the baseline of what we're going to talk about. The issue we're trying to solve, what are the obstacles, the steps to take a little bit more in depth, exercising and continuing those relationships. Like I said, surprisingly, Nate and I were on the same page. Maybe not so surprising. Okay, so what are we trying to solve? The cyber incident response, as I said, handled all over the board. We can change it, variations based on department, based on private, public, everything. And OEM has a defined incident command structure that they use, and we haven't been able to incorporate it into cyber until now. So what are some of the obstacles that we're working on? Jargon barriers, as Nate mentioned, acronyms all over the place. In our very first meeting, Nate and I were both talking about SAs, and I was talking about system admins and he was talking about situational awareness. And I had to stop and say, hey guys, I don't know what you're talking about. This isn't making sense. Because they had said, oh, well, you give the SA. And I was like, what do you give them? What? But we were able to identify, hey, too many acronyms that both of us have that don't mean the same thing. So let's eliminate as much of that as possible. So that's one. Buy-in from the top and bottom, both directions. As Nate said, it can be an issue both ways, but where we need to really focus on is that, yes, that top down is for culture support, but the bottom up is where your incident response and incident command structure actually comes from. So we need to focus on building it appropriately from both directions. The different structures, again, county versus a municipality versus a private sector. And that mutual intelligence acknowledgement is super important. Nate said, learn from each other, and that has been huge. But to get to the point where you can learn from each other, you have to make sure that you're listening and you're not creating this environment where you believe that you know what's right, the other person or the other teams can't offer anything. So you need to get that open, honest, transparent environment. So what are the steps to take? So start with the conversation. And I included a couple of bullet points here on some of the questions that you might want to go through. When I emailed Nate and we sat down in a room and talked about, I strongly encourage face-to-face also, because there's just so much that you get from that in-person meeting on these things. They explained everything that they do to me. First, we took it and they said, all right, this is what the incident command structure is. This is how we communicate things. This is how we would go about this. And I said, okay, I'm going to listen, ask all these questions, and then I'm going to evaluate what emergency do I think of when I think of a cyber incident? Because most of the time people say, no, Office of Emergency Management handles emergency management, but they don't understand cyber. They can't do it. You can't relate it to cyber. That doesn't work for us. So I wanted to focus on the similarities. And for me, an active shooter, Nate had said in so many words that when it comes to an active shooter situation, that they identify where they believe the threat is, finding a buddy, identifying that threat, containing it, and eliminating the threat. Same thing with cybersecurity in different words. So I was like, all right, let's focus this on a way that makes sense to IT in an active shooter that makes sense to both of us. Same thing with a fire. You don't know where the fire's at necessarily, but you need to put it out. You need to contain it and put it out. So how do we do that together? Again, these are just some baseline questions. If you'd like my slides, feel free to contact me afterwards, but some questions that help facilitate that conversation to really get it going. How are they trained? Who plays these roles? How do you choose them? What do you do? How do you communicate? And that really got Nate and I to start talking. So we found that common ground of active shooter, cyber incident, very similar. And then we work on, I put in here that whatever metaphor fits. So if you want to go with fire, go for it. But then we worked on, okay, so what does a support system look like for an incident command structure? What have we already built? A lot of us already have playbooks. If not, that's a really great place to start too. But if you haven't got playbooks, what I would really advise you to do is develop them with your Office of Emergency Management. You obviously have your IT people who know what they do, hands in the weeds on the ground with a cyber incident. However, really incorporating your Office of Emergency Management and their structure to it is beyond helpful. And then what relationships already exist? When you have an emergency of some sort, what already exists? Who's your Office of Emergency Management talking to? Who does IT talk to? Who are your resources if you need to escalate? Who are their resources? How do we make that come together so we eliminate that redundancy, but we still get great coverage? So the hard part was coming back to the information technology department, because as obviously I'm an IT person, so I say this about myself, but as IT people, historically, we have shut that door. We've siloed ourselves. We have made it so that way we believe, no, you know nothing about cyber, therefore it's not helpful. And that's not the case. And it's not the case by a long shot. So that learning from each other, that mutual respect, starting that conversation back in IT, then, hey, this is what I learned from our Office of Emergency Management. They have a defined structure. We do not need to recreate the wheel. We just need to modify the wheel to fit better with cyber incidents. So how do we do that? We first scheduled a training for all of our IT people, and we sent them through a NIMS training that had a cyber influence. And Nate and his team were awesome about helping us coordinate that. And again, we worked together with the state and with our sheriff's office, with our Office of Emergency Management, with the executive team at Arapahoe. And we worked together to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to go to this training. We were able to do it online, and it took about a full day, but they offered really, really great stuff. So if you do not have access to a training like that, I strongly recommend that you email myself or Nate or Maddie, and we can absolutely help you get that set up or point you in the right direction. All right, step 5. So this is where we actually built the command structure. All of this up until this point has just been conversations, just getting to know each other, building those relationships, focusing on building that trust and transparency and mutual respect. What I did then is I went and I said, okay, they have these roles for each of their incidents. They have roles that they can say, hey, you are this role, and hand whatever it is to this person. And that person says, I know what I'm responsible for and I can go and do it. So I first started on, before I even got to identifying those checklists, I got to who's going to be my people on this. And I picked them based on what their job actually corresponded to in this instance. For example, they have a planning chief. And the planning chief is somebody who facilitates, all right, we're going to have these milestones. This is our start. This is our end. These are the checkpoints we need to hit. Who does that best? Project manager. So I brought in, traditionally not involved in cyber incidents, our project management team. And I said, all right, you guys do this the best. Why not have you do it for our cyber incidents? Same thing, the logistics, coordinating everything, communicating with people. Our business analysts, great at doing that. They manage business relationships. They coordinate new software, new issues, how to fix things, and they become creative and inventive. So I picked 3 people for each of those roles that OEM had given to me, and I focused on training them. Here's what we would be looking to do. And then I took the checklist that I had gotten from Nate and I modified it to fit cybersecurity. Some of the things didn't apply at all. Some of them were right on the nose, and some of them we had to add our own things, but we correlated it in conjunction with what our Office of Emergency Management is doing. And I want to put a pin in that because I do have an example later in my slides. And then we identified, okay, what does our incident command structure look like? I have a visual, again, that's coming up, but who reports to who and what's a general basis for it if somebody's a more visual person? Again, we developed out those checklists. I made them in a little card. I have an example of that too. Again, email me if you'd like any of this stuff. And then they have briefing cards. Don't recreate the wheel. Go ahead and just modify it to fit what cyber needs. Focus on those areas of similarities, because when you get down into the weeds, you can absolutely find tons of things that are hurdles to overcome. So we're going to keep it high level when we're building out this incident command structure, and we're going to focus heavily on what it looks like from the top down. Obviously, you're going to have your playbooks, you're in the weeds people. Obviously, you're going to have more direct subsets, procedures, X, Y, and Z. But in this instance, we're training people on how to create a command structure. So we're going to keep it more high level. And we developed a contact repository. That includes all of our IT people that are important that we need to say, hey, we'll need them for in the weeds remediation of some sort. Our internal contacts for communications, internal communication, external communications, and our external ones. We have Nate, we have his team, we have the kayak, we have the MSI SAC, we have the state, all of these different organizations, and we need to have a contact at them, and we need to have it readily accessible and know when to contact them. Then we have an activity log. That is incredibly important and something we hadn't done before, but we just put it in our Teams channel, and we have it so they have the activity, a brief description of it, the progress on it, who's completing it, and when they're completing it. And that's visible to everyone, in every action, whether you're in communications or logistics or operations or the incident commander. You go ahead and put in whatever action you're doing. So that way, when it comes time to transition new staff, if it goes past an operational period, or if you just need to recap, or when you're coming up with those outcomes and the lessons learned from it that you're going to take away and incorporate into your improvement plan, it's essential. So we have everybody log it in there, and you can go ahead and scroll. And if you want to filter by one person because you're more interested in, I need to know where we're at operationally on containment or eradication or whatever, that's a very important tool to have. And then keep it all in one place. Do not have people hunting for all different kinds of things. When you are in an incident, you don't have time to read. You don't have time to go and look for things. You are very short, sweet, to the point. So that's what you need to do. Don't have incident response plans that are 20 pages long. Nobody's going to read them. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to want to deal with it. And it's going to be useless. You're going to be able to check the box to say you had one, and it's not going to do you any favors. And like Nate said, eventually everybody will need to execute this in some way. So keep it short, make it usable, make it all in one place that you can just go to, and this is where it's at. So what does our command structure look like? So at Arapahoe, we have the incident commander, which usually is our director or 2 other people that can fill in that role. Then we have our internal liaison, the cybersecurity person who can help facilitate those relationships, help in any role, do incident command things if necessary. That person's kind of our catch-all for anything that needs help with. Our external liaison is Nate and his team, and they are able to help us with those contacting of entities outside of us, finding resources. They are capable of a ton of stuff, so we rely heavily on them. Then we have our communications chief, And I worked with our communications chief to understand, hey, what are some of the things that you might need to put out if we had an incident? And whether internal messaging, external messaging, community to the board, whatever. And we worked to come up with predetermined messaging. They're very simple. They're very sweet. I don't know if that's a word for it, but short and to the point. And we were able to construct those messages ahead of time. So that way in the middle of an incident, he didn't have to come to me or the director or anybody else and say, hey, what's going on? And what do I say about this? Is this okay? Is this how you explain this? We have those predetermined messages of, okay, if we have a ransomware attack and it's only infecting internally, this is how we respond. If we have it externally, this is how we respond. If we're not sure about X, Y, and Z, here we go. It's already approved. No need to communicate on that portion during it. You can just, hey, we've sent out the approved predetermined messaging. That's important. We talked about the planning chief, organizing how the entire event looks from start to finish. I do have an example of our playbook as well coming up. And then our operations chief at Arapahoe County. We then have our technical services manager, our systems, and our networking managers. These people may or may not be directly involved in the incident command structure, and however your organization does it, just remember this doesn't have to look exactly like this. It can be whatever fits you guys. For us, it works best to separate those teams out so that way each team has their goals and objectives and can put those into the activity log and accomplish those in a more rapid format. So here's an example of what I gave for the logistics chief, quick reference card. So I gave a brief description. Most people don't read that in an incident, but some people feel a lot more comfortable having that to reflect on and say, okay, am I missing something? Am I getting something else here? All the tasks that they are responsible for and the things that they're going to need to complete those tasks. We go through this on a regular basis. Not only from the logistics perspective, all of the teams have, all of the roles have access to all of the other roles information as well. So they might go through and say, hey, I think that it would be helpful in an incident to do X, and you can fill that out. You can make these look however you want. I personally just took a lot of the stuff Nate gave me and a format that I got from Jeffco and said, hey, I'm going to put it all together in one quick reference. So it's just a quick card, everything you need to know, all your questions, and where to find it. Remember, these can look however you want them to be and include whatever you want. If this doesn't make sense for you, customize it. Don't focus on the hangups, focus on what we can do that's the same. As I said, we have a general outline. I want to remind you, this needs to be short. It needs to be concise. You need to keep it very high level. Go ahead and start that incident. Evaluate your complexity analysis. Now, some of you might say, we don't have one of those. What's one of those, Amber? OEM, like Nate said, goes in and they say, all right, we have this issue happening. We have a fire happening. We are going to need X amount of fire trucks. We're going to need X amount of firemen. We're going to need blah, 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 blah. And they go in and they evaluate it. And based on the complexity that they come out with is how much they escalate that incident beyond themselves. So with Arapahoe County, we're going to take that and we're going to say, okay, how does this look for us? What's a really complex? When do we go, oh crap, we need help? And we broke that down into sections. Again, keep it very short, concise. And yes, I know when you're going through a cyber incident, it could be 2 PCs infected and it could be groundbreaking or shattering, or it could be 50 PCs infected and not be an issue at all. So it's hard to do those types of complexity analysis. So what I want you to focus on in those moments is how much time do I have between X and Z before I need to ask for help? Is it better to ask for help sooner or later? I personally would rather have all hands on deck and say, sorry, we didn't need you, or thanks for coming, instead of saying, oh crap, we're in over our heads. So when I looked at that, all right, with ransomware, I don't care if it's just one instance of ransomware. I'm calling all hands on deck and activating that incident command structure versus a phishing email. I might not. So you have to make up what you're comfortable with as an organization, and that's going to vary wildly based on your maturity levels. When you activate that incident command structure, you have briefing cards. the Office of Emergency Management has these briefing cards that they provided to me. And again, I didn't recreate the wheel. I used what they had, took away what we didn't need. I added some things we did need and made them our own. But again, they make sense to the Office of Emergency Management. So focus on those. I put in basic steps in here to, okay, if you're briefing your teams on this, or you're repeating these steps or whatever, again, keep this as just a high overview of our planning chief needs to say, we're going to start, and here's these points in between. This is what we need to make those points. Briefing cards. So I'm going to show you an example in this next slide of briefing cards, but what I want to touch on is they have the purpose of the meeting. They have how it works, who's going to be presenting for it, who's going to be documenting, the tone of the meeting. Is this a quick? Is this a, we need more explanations? How does that work? Who needs to attend it? And what items do you absolutely need to cover? So here is an example of an initial incident briefing card that I took from OEM and adapted to cyber. Again, when you get in these incidents, you need to have these meetings be quick, 5 to 10 minutes max. You need to be able to say, hey, what are our incident objectives? Okay, boom, 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 here we go. That way in future meetings, you can say, yep, we have met this, we're working on this, this is in progress, we need more resources for this, let's coordinate all of these things. Here are the things that we need to cover. And again, all of this is being documented, all of this is being communicated. So when you have this initial activation of the incident command structure, you're going to go through a few of these different briefing cards. And I put the ones that we have here. We have the activation of the incident command structure. We have the initial incident briefing, a section briefing, which is where our chiefs go back to their teams and say, this is what we need to do. These are our objectives. This is what we're working on. The initial briefing of those incoming resources, a situational briefing, whether you have a big update or you've had something change, or you've completed something, that situational update. Transition briefing, if resources are transitioning at any point. Your closeout briefing to say, yep, we're getting ready to close out this, and then demobilizing everybody from being on that activated incident command structure. Other considerations. That activity log, as I talked about, is incredibly important. You need to make sure everybody has access so that way everybody's making the most informed decisions as they can as they go. Be mindful of that decision fatigue. I had never heard of that before until I met with Nate and his team. And it was like a duh moment because yeah, we can determine a lot of this stuff ahead of time. We might not be able to know the exact strain of ransomware. Maybe somebody's on vacation, out skiing. All of those obviously come into play, but things like predetermined messaging and our contact repository and things like, all right, where's our checklist at and the training for these things. Each of these things can be done preemptively. And like Nate said, that is incredibly less expensive than on the back end. Plus, you're going to respond quicker. You're going to have a more fluid movement as a team, and then keep it all in one place. All of everything, your sub procedures for any of those tasks that you need to do, anything that you feel is important to that, whether it be something even like a chain of custody form that you might need to use for X, Y, or Z, keep it in one place. So if you couldn't tell by this slide, it's practice. Practice what you've learned. Practice what it's like to be in each role. Make sure you know if somebody is comfortable in that role or not. How are they responding? What are some issues you might be having? Practice those briefing cards. Practice having a meeting with it. Do those quick, concise communications. Practice how to get that long-winded email down to a sentence. Get that bottom line up front. Practice what you want the documentation to like. Create any templates that you might need to ahead of time. Practice, 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 and get away from what we have seen traditionally as cybersecurity exercises. In cybersecurity exercises, traditionally, as Nate said, we have seen that approach of, hey, everybody, all hands on deck all the time. This is what it is. Okay, how do we handle it? And it's scary and frustrating, and nobody knows what anyone else is doing. There's always poor communication between teams, especially between IT and everyone else. So instead, focus on sitting down, having people well-versed in their roles. And that way, it doesn't matter if it's just malware, ransomware, an insider threat, a power outage, any of these different things, we're going to have so much practice communicating in X way and documenting in this way and concise communication that, again, it's going to feel very fluid. And you're able to just connect with your OEM team and say, hey guys, we're at this point in our playbooks, or we're at this point and we're needing X resources. And that way it's not a, hey, catch up time. Here's how we handle this in IT. You guys can just catch up and get us what we need right now. And they're sitting here going, what? Okay, maybe. And then 7, the most important thing, as Nate said, maintain those relationships and build trust. That mutual intelligence acknowledgement is so important. Being able to recognize other teams, whether you're IT or OEM, and their expertise in that situation, and then being able to say, I don't know what you're talking about, or I'm not sure how we do this. Can we coordinate better on this? Be very willing, open, and honest to admit, hey, I don't know what's going on here. You're talking about situational awareness and I'm talking about system admins and I'm confused. How do we do this? Or pose questions. Again, hey guys, how would you handle this? Here's how we would. Can we come up with a way together? And just really dive in deep and practice that respect so much. Regular meetings. I hate when people say cyber exercises should be done annually, because by the time you do it next year, you've forgotten everything. So I recommend these tabletop conversations and practices on a quarterly or more basis. I would like to say that in previous times with Arapahoe County, when we have done some sort of incident exercise, it has been more of a lessons observed rather than a lessons learned, because by the time we redid it, those same lessons were observed the next time because we didn't practice them. We didn't spend time focusing on educating and communicating. And so it was just again and again and again. Really focus on those regular meetings, even if it's just saying, hey, let's just get together and go over the briefing cards. Do that quarterly with everybody in their roles. They need to be educated, they need to be up to date, and everybody needs to be on the same page. You change your documentation, you change your playbooks, you change your contact repository, whatever it is. Take a 30-minute meeting and sit down with your Office of Emergency Management and your IT team and make sure you know how it impacts both of you. And then obviously spend time reviewing those plans and be transparent. It's okay to say, I don't know, I don't have experience in this. This isn't my forte. Can I get some help on this? If you're able to be transparent, still respect each other as individuals and professionals in your field, and know that these people are all here to help each other, it creates an environment that Nate and I have found blossoms heavily. The creativity that IT gets with all of these incident response things, the structure that OEM has with their managing of incidents can work together flawlessly if we focus more on those same areas. If we don't get too into the weeds and say, well, your whole structure doesn't work, whatever it may be, we focus more on what does work and how can we adapt it. That being said, I will leave it open to any questions anybody has, and I will stop sharing my screen.
That was fantastic, Amber. And it does look like we do have a couple of questions. So there was one about what if the contact repository is unavailable online? We make sure that we have a recent paper copy and binders, etc. That is one of the questions. And then also, how do you coordinate with OEM during an incident?
Okay, so I think that you need to have online and offline for where everything is located. And for us, we made sure to put it in 2 places, one of them that can be reached offline, one of them that can be reached if we have access to online. Both of those are updated at the same time and evaluated on a regular basis. Paper copy works just fine. I love paper. I sit here and do paper notes all day, sticky notes, all of that stuff. So if you need a paper binder, go get them, Tiger. If you need to have it on your desktop, whatever works for you guys, I would just caution you that when you do have that redundancy, you need to go ahead and make sure that they're both up to date versioned at the same time. So that way people aren't out of the loop on different things and following different things. Coordinating with OEM during an incident. Our Office of Emergency Management is on our IT distro list. And as well, I know Nate's cell phone number. I know his team's number. I have their information in our repository for things. And I have a Teams channel that I have set up with everyone who would potentially be in an incident. And once anything goes on, that Teams channel gets activated. Everyone's already in the loop. All of those documents are readily available, and we can go ahead and coordinate effectively. Whether you're in person and able to do it one-on-one, and I go into Nate's office and say, hey, let's activate the command center and like do something cool. I don't know, like Mission Impossible style or whatever it may be. We go ahead and we, again, maintain that relationship, and we talk and we update, and we have that mutual intelligence acknowledgement that they're great. Let's just say this, IT people are wonderful at responding and getting crap done. And Office of Emergency Management does the exact same thing for emergencies, and they have a structure. So they beat us to the punch on this, and they're willing to share it. So let's take advantage of it.
To tack onto that question from Fran, something that we've done internally, and I don't know, maybe one or two other folks that I'm aware of have done it. We've actually created a cyber and communications position within our command and general staff. So it is integrated 100% of the time. We don't activate our VOC without cyber and communications being a staffed function all the time, not even if it's not a cyber event.
Absolutely. I see Brandon said, have you developed cyber incident categories to help determine levels of response and vulnerabilities? Yes. What Nate was talking about with those typing and classifications of things, we incorporated them into our complexity analysis. And so for those of you who are in IT, again, that's really looking at what's the appropriate level of response. My risk tolerance and your risk tolerance may be different. Your organization may have a different risk tolerance and risk acceptance level, but you need to go ahead and say, okay, with this level of vulnerability, maybe it's a critical vulnerability that is externally exploitable. You're going to raise a few more flags than you would if that was an internal vulnerability and from, you know, a not an exploitable basis. So yes, build out as much as that as you can ahead of time. And don't be afraid to ask for help, again, from your fellow IT people and your Office of Emergency Management. You can ask them, does this seem like a reasonable response? I have no idea what I'm doing here. And Nate will tell me like, Amber, that's bull, go back to the drawing board. Not maybe in those words, but you have to develop that connection with each other.
I see a question from Deb. We do have in our contact list, all of our energy folks are tied into this. We know that SCADA is not something that we deal with on a basis. We don't run utilities in the county, but we're absolutely aware of what's happening with SCADA and into that resourcing perspective that I was talking about earlier. Hope to be able to draw some experience if that becomes necessary in the energy sector.
Yeah, and include any of those contacts that you may or may not need to use. Just include them. The worst thing that you're going to have is an extra name with a phone number or an email or whatever. And again, my risk tolerance is that I would rather have everybody, okay, hey, I don't know what this is yet. I need your help just in case. And then say, all right, everybody, thanks for coming. Let's go get pizza. It's just up to you what you and your organization's risk tolerance is and how you would like to go about it. I would strongly advise that you just put everything in there in a way that makes sense, in a way that's accessible, in a way that's not 50 million pages that nobody's going to use. All right, it looks like that is the end of the questions that we have. I do want to reemphasize, if anybody has any other questions or whatnot, Nate and his Office of Emergency Management team have been phenomenal with working with me and being so detailed in how they go about things and being so willing to say, I don't know that about cybersecurity, but I do know this, maybe this could help you. And then, you know, coming back with my questions, they were amazing. So, and then again, IT, they were awesome too. Feel free to contact Nate or myself And Arapahoe County has tons and tons and tons of amazing people that would just be happy to help and lead you through this process. I strongly look forward to seeing everybody's progress on this the next time we talk.
Thank you so much, Amber. And if you wouldn't mind throwing your contact information in there too. I know it might be changing soon, but if we need to send that updated information out, we'll do that with the reporting. But again, we cannot thank you both enough for this. This was fantastic. You just really put a lot of the pieces in place and some really good building blocks. And before we wrap up, I do want to put another plug in for the whole of state. So if you enjoyed this presentation, this is the kind of work that we're trying to do and trying to bring to communities throughout Colorado, so that we can do some of this really good sharing about what has worked, and sometimes even what hasn't worked, so that we can all learn together. And so if you are interested in that, I'll throw my contact information in the chat. And then I wanted to give Jonah a chance to just share a little bit more about the Colorado Cyber Resource Center. And then Eugene, if you had any final thoughts, please go for it.
Yeah, Maddie, thank you. And thank you, Amber and Nate, for that presentation. It was awesome. I'm going to put the link to our site, the Colorado Cyber Resource Center, in the chat here. We have a ton of things that we're developing on the site, in addition to organizing and continuing to put together a lot of these webinars in the Colorado community. We have a ton of resources in terms of incident response, policies and playbooks, overall where to start if you're just getting into developing your security program, who to talk to, who to contact. We are aiming to be your one-stop shop for some help in developing that security program. So we're blessed with all of our Colorado security professionals here, including Nate and Amber, and we have tons of other connections as well. So if you have any questions, please reach out.
And the only thing I would add is Nate being you're the vice president of the Colorado Emergency Management Association. So and we were lucky enough to get Maddie and her team to speak at the conference. So any emergency managers that are here, please look forward to seeing them at the conference. If you haven't registered already, you can go to CEMA.com and do that as well. But CEP is glad to be part of this conversation as well, and we hope to bring more of these presentations along with the National Security Center in the future. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you all have a great day. Happy holidays.
Thanks all.